a hand in no time.
As I said in my introduction, outside the castle gates, we're doing the Onomy Rath hill walk, and this takes us through the Blayney Hope Estate. We've already passed the walled garden on the right hand side as we came in here, and behind us are the stables and servants' quarters of the castle as it was built up in the 1850s and 60s by Henry Thomas Hope, who was a contemporary of Eisenberg Kingdom Brunel. And the Hope family were very famous in history. They were the bondholders or the money lenders of the 1700s and 1800s. And I mentioned this just in past, I don't want to go into a whole rigmarole about history, but they were the ones who loaned the US government $15 million to buy 50 million acres from France in the Louisiana Purchase. They bought the 50 million acres for $15 million at 3 cents an acre, and it effectively doubled the size of the United States as it was then. The original castle that the Blayneys built, Edward Blayney built in 1610, stands just directly in front of where I am now. And the new castle was constructed in the 1790s by the then Lord Blayney. Was a Georgian 5-bay castle, and it stands slightly nearer the lake shore, and we'll see that from another view as we come back in towards the entrance. I'll see you further round on the path. We're going to our right now. Here we are beside Barney's Green, which is another stop on the Onomy Hill Walk here in Castleblayney on the Blayney Hope Estate. And where I'm standing is outside an ice house that was constructed in 1789 when the new Georgian castle was built below. And the reason they built the ice houses was there was no refrigeration at that time. And the winters were colder. They used to gather the ice and snow, ice off the lake, snow off the land, and pack it in there. You can't see from here because the ice house is not, the reconstruction of it is not finished, but it's about 25 foot deep, 40 foot deep in total, and it's lined with bricks in the shape of an egg. And this particular one is one of the best preserved ice houses in Ireland. It was used up until the 1840s when refrigeration came in, mechanical refrigeration, and then it fell into disuse. This is one of two ice houses on the estate. As I said, this one was built in 1799 when the new castle was constructed. There is an older ice house down near the lake in the play park, which was built about 150 years before, constructed with stone. Right. To my right here is the farmyard of the castle, where cattle and hens and all that were kept to supply the castle and the workers, and it leads on to the walled garden from the back side. And we're going to walk along the back wall of St. Maeldide's Church towards the Rath at the top of the hill, and we'll talk more about what happens there then. Thank you. We're up at the top of Onomy Hill, on the Onomy Hill walk, and there's a rath over here on my left hand side, which I'll mention in a moment. Behind me you see Loch Muckno, and I'm going to describe the topography of the land that you see in the distance behind. The Black Island is just behind me here. Beyond that is Mullyash, right, which is the highest point in Monaghan. To the right of that, away over, to my left, you can see in the distance the Moor Mountains. Slieve Gullion, where Satanta killed the hound. Slieve Gullion is a corruption of Slieve Cullen, and Cullen had his forge there, and that's where Satanta killed the ferocious hound and got the name of Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cullen. To the right of that is Feed Mountain, and then beyond that the Cooley Mountains down into the sea, running down into the sea. But the topography of Loch Muckno that you're looking at is about a third of the lake, and the castle is back down over my shoulder on the right hand side. Before that you have the two churches, St Mary's and St Maeldide's Church. On the top, as I said, on the top of Mullyash Mountain, there is a cairn that was built by the same tribe or the same settlers who built Nowt, Doubt and Newgrange. On the top of Slieve Gullion there's a cairn that was built at the same time. They built these as calendars because these were the first settled farmers, Neolithic farmers, and the grain that they were trying to grow here for food had been grown in the Middle East, coming from probably Iran, Iraq, and it had worked its way across Europe over the centuries. And what they were trying to do here was grow this grain here in a climate that wasn't as dry or as warm. So if they planted the grain too early, it was liable to come out of the ground and the frost would kill it. If they planted it too late, it wouldn't ripen. So they needed to know the shortest days of the year and count maybe 40, 50, 60 days from that when it would be safe to plant the seed in the ground. They were used also as tombs or memorial places for their dead, but again, that's twice as long before Jesus Christ is from us. Jesus Christ is 2,000 years ago, this is 4,000 years before that. We're talking beyond the construction of the pyramids. They're the oldest man-made monuments standing on the earth at the moment. We have Mullandy, which we have mentioned in another walk round Concra Wood. We also have the remains of the Black Pig's Dyke, which was a fortification that ran across South Ulster to prevent the people from Connacht or from Leinster from stealing the good Ulster cattle. You know the story of the Turnbow Cooley, and the currency at that time was cattle. The more cattle you had, the wealthier you had, right? And Ulster was a sort of a movable feast. It was the wealthiest of all the provinces of Ireland, the 5 provinces. It was the largest of the provinces, and the Clan O'Rourke were the tribe who ruled it. They ruled from Donegal in the west back to County Down and Antrim in the east, and at one stage it extended as far south as the Boyne and as far west as Loch Allen, and this is why they were in conflict with Queen Maeve and the Leinster men, and it was all about cattle, and all the ancient stories are about cattle and stealing. At that time they were sensible. They didn't fight wars in the winter because you couldn't cross the rivers, you couldn't move on the land, so they waited until the planting was done, the crops were growing, they went way off and they fought their bits of wars over cattle, and then in the winter or in the autumn the harvest had to be got in, so the war stopped and they settled down for the winter and gathered themselves to fight again. We're going to walk on over towards Onomy Rath. It was a settlement, a farm settlement, and all around us here, there on the tops of the hills, there are farm settlements, and what that was, number one, to stop others stealing the cattle, was also to keep wolves and brown bears, which would have lived in Ireland at that time, 2,000 2,500 years ago, from breaking in and killing the animals, and it kept everybody safe at night. Most of the tillage farming was done on the south facing hills, and the grazing was done on the north facing hills, and that's basically their living at the time. Down behind me, on the way to the Black Island, is where this townland got its name. It was written by the English planters who settled here as Onomy, O-N-O-M-Y, which made no sense to anybody, because every other townland in this area has an Irish description, which is very descriptive of the topography of that land. But whoever was asked where he came from, he said Onomy, right? And Onomy was written down as O-N-O-M-Y, but it's actually a corruption of Nemija, which is a ford in the middle of a lake and a swamp that ran for about 10 miles towards Crossmaglen and that, down towards Clontibbert, and it couldn't be crossed. There were no roads through it way back 2,000 years ago. So the only way to cross the lake was at the ford down here at the bridge, which you'll see in another walk. I'm heading on towards the Rath at Onomy, and we'll chat more there. Thank you.
Hello there.
Okay. The side has to be done too, so
well, this bucket was like 3/4, wasn't it?
yeah. Okay. Are you side already, like?
Yeah.
Buy it.
Here I am, standing beside the lake in front of the Blayney Hope Castle. This castle was an original Georgian construction built in 1799 by the then Lord Blayney. He was related to the Caledon family who owned huge tracts of land in Armagh and round Ballynahinch in County Down. And the market house that you saw in the town area was built, modelled on the market house that was built for the Caledons in Ballynahinch. And that was again to facilitate the linen trade in those areas. Linen was the flax was the crop and linen was the end product, of which Ulster was very, very proud. This castle was built in 1799 by Robert Woodgrove. He was the architect, and he had been sent to Ireland about 10 years before by an architectural firm called Soames of London, and they were responsible for a lot of the great houses in England. They had designed and constructed the great house in England, and Robert Woodgrove was an apprentice with them, and he was sent over originally to Ireland to work on Arras on Uachtaráin, which is in the Phoenix Park and is now the President's residence. He was also sent after that he was sent to a place called Barron's Court in Tyrone, which was took 10 years to construct. And by that time he had finished his apprenticeship with Soames, and his first commission in his own right as an architect was to construct a castle for Lord Blayney here on the shores of Loch Muckno at a cost of £8,000 sterling. This is in 1787, 1788. And this is the original Georgian house that he designed. A lot of the buildings around it were from that period. But in the 1850s, the Blayney family got into financial difficulty and sold the estate to the Hope family, whose family home was in Deepdean in Surrey, and they were hugely wealthy. Henry Thomas Hope, as a wedding present from his uncle, was granted 5,000 acres adjacent to Deepdean. Deepdean itself was an estate of 5,000 acres, and his uncle bought an adjoining estate of a further 5,000 acres. The Hope family were hugely wealthy. As I mentioned before, they were bondholders or money lenders to all the countries in Europe. Napoleon and France were fighting a war against England. They loaned money to Napoleon to fight the war against England. They also loaned money to the English to fight the war against the French. They were the winners in all this. When Henry Thomas Hope bought the estate here, he spent a fortune round the town and round here, bringing it up to the standards to which he was accustomed. His wife was a French actress, or his partner at the time was a French actress, Adele, and she had lived in Victorian England, and all the wealth that the Hopes had didn't get her acceptance. Her problems were threefold. She was French, she was Catholic, and herself and Henry Thomas Hope had a child out of marriage. Now they did marry, and it was a long-term relationship. There wasn't anything seedy or anything about the relationship. But once she got the chance to move away from Victorian England, she jumped at the chance to have an estate in Ireland. And it was transformed from the plain Georgian house with all the embellishments you see around it, with the Hope crest on the four sides of it. And the Hopes expanded the castle, and over the next 70 or 80 years, and then their descendants lost the fortune, which it's very hard to imagine because they were some of the wealthiest people in the world at the time, but who was squandered. They owned the Hope Diamond, which is on display in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, and it's the most visited artefact there. It was acquired by Henry Thomas Hope's uncle, who had amassed a jewellery collection, and was owned by the French royal family, lost during the French Revolution, and said to bring bad luck with it to whichever family owned it. It didn't do Marie Antoinette or King Louis any good, and anyone who had it afterwards suffered misfortune in some shape or form. The Hope Diamond has a strange connection with Castleblayney, because in the 1850s a wheelwright or a cartwright from Tipperary went off to America to seek his fortune. And by the time he reached America, he figured he was a prospector and he went looking for gold and wasn't particularly successful at that. But eventually he hit lucky in one of the richest silver mines in the United States. Hugely, hugely wealthy. And his daughter was Evelyn Walsh. And she married a McLean family from just outside Washington. There's a town called McLean just outside Washington, but the CIA are now based, another claim to fame. And they were involved in steel manufacturing and printing. They were hugely wealthy in their own right. And her husband bought the Hope Diamond in the 1920s as a wedding present for his wife. He paid $25,000 for it. And again, the connection with those is when Walsh went from Tipperary to America, he only returned to Ireland once to visit his homestead in Tipperary and his relations in Castleblayney and Monaghan. This is before they knew of the connection with the Hope Diamond here. So that's coming at it from two directions. After Evelyn Walsh's death, the estate was disposed of and it was bought by the firm Cartier, which are famous diamond and jewel dealers. And they presented the Hope Diamond with all its infamy to the Smithsonian in Washington to keep it out away from a family which might bring it more bad luck. The path you see running down from the castle leads to a jetty here, and over in front of my right hand side there's the remains of a boathouse. Around the lake shore there are a number of stone jetties, and the Hope family and the Blayneys before them used to travel round. The lake was all part of their estate. They used to travel round the whole lake, land at various jetties. Over here beside the temple, which was a summer house, Mullandy, which was where the old monastery was, and still a burial ground there. South Lodge, above at the top of the lake, which was the end of the Blayney Hope estate, and it abuts the Bath estate. So that's how they travel around the lake from this point here. We've already restored some of the buildings, the ice house and some of the other buildings on the estate. Our hope over the next few years is to restore the boathouse. We have photographs of it, and we know where the jetties are. They've fallen into disrepair, but that's stonework. It's not the hardest thing in the world to restore. And we would hope to be given tours of the lake in the next maybe 10 or 12 years to make this place worth visiting, so everyone can appreciate the beauty that you've seen on these walks around the town. Thanks a lot.